The presidential election, with 3 hours to go, voting remains very slow. Dublin taxi drivers lift their blockade after talks with corporation tax traffic officials. And a Cork doctor faces more than 230 charges of sexual and indecent assault. Good evening, welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme this evening, the British Home Secretary announces he's lifting all remaining exclusion orders on suspected terrorists.
Boxer Steve Collins gets his turn on the witness stand in his High Court case against promoter Barry Hearn. In soccer, the Belgians have allocated an extra 1,500 tickets for Irish fans for the Brussels qualifier.
But first, after 6 weeks of campaigning in the presidential election, today the voters are passing their verdict on the 5 candidates seeking the highest office in the land, and at the same time voting on the constitutional amendment on cabinet confidentiality. Despite one of the liveliest presidential campaigns ever, voting in many parts of the country was for much of the day described as slow. But the polling booths remain open until 9 o'clock this evening, and the pace of voting is expected to pick up as people return home from work. The candidates themselves were among the early voters this morning, except that is for Mary McAleese, who doesn't have a vote in the election.
The turnout's been particularly low in most parts of the country, ranging from about 15% in part of the Midlands and the West to a high of 25% in parts of Dublin. That may partly be due to the fact that polling booths didn't open until 9 this morning, so most workers didn't have a chance to vote early. In the general election, the polls opened at 8 a.m. All candidates are hoping for a rush to the polls tonight, but no one is speculating on who will benefit most from a low turnout. All 5 candidates were out early today, 4 to vote in their local polling booths. Mary McAleese didn't have a vote, so she did some last-minute canvassing in Grafton Street with the Taoiseach. Dana arrived at her local polling station in Ballsbridge with her family and friends. In Cork, Aidy Roach cast her vote at Little William Street, accompanied by her husband Sean and supporters. Derek Nally cast his vote at his local station in Bunclody, County Wexford, supported by his wife Joan. Mary Benotti went to her local station in Ringsend, Dublin, along with her daughter Tanya. There's almost 3 hours to go before the polls close, and voters are reminded that they don't have to have their formal voting card with them, as various other identity cards, such as a bank card, post office book or driving licence, will do.
Well, now for a look at how the voting is going around the country, we go to our Sligo studio and our correspondent Eileen Magner. Eileen, how is polling in the north-west this evening?
It's going very slowly so far, Una. This presidential election has seen Donegal make history by being the first county to nominate an independent candidate, Dana. And in the last presidential election, it made history by recording the lowest poll in the country. Just over half of the electorate voted. And Donegal may well be heading for the history books again, because there's been no rush to the ballot box in either constituency. The 2 islands which cast their votes on Tuesday, Tory and Inishbofin, had a roughly 50% turnout in each case, and at the moment the rest of the county is recording an 8 to a 20% turnout. In the double constituencies of Sligo, Leitrim and Cavan Monaghan, things are also very sluggish, less than 20% in many cases. In Sligo, the panic of county council and on post workers was obviously not shared by the electorate. With just days to go before polling, thousands of voting cards had to be reissued in Sligo when it was discovered that the wrong register of electors had been used, and people not entitled to vote had received cards, and many other people who were entitled to vote were assigned to the wrong polling booth. And on a final note, we're getting a lot of feedback that there's quite an amount of confusion among voters on what the referendum is actually all about, and some people, we're told, aren't even bothering to take the voting papers. So it'll be interesting to see how the presidential and the referendum votes tally in the end of the day. Back now to studio.
Thanks, Eileen. Now we go to the Midwest region, and our correspondent CATHY Halloran is in our Limerick studio. What's turnout like there, CATHY?
Well, I suppose like the rest of the country so far, slow is the best way to describe the turnout here in the Midwest. In West Clare, the rural part of the constituency, the turnout ranges from between 8 and 13%. Further east of the constituency, it's up to about 25%. In County Limerick, places like Adair, Rathkeil, Newcastle West, the turnout ranges from about 16 to 20%. In Limerick City, it's still very slow, between 15 and 20%. They've been a bit busier in Tipperary North. The turnout in places like Nina and Thurles ranges from 23 to 27%. So 9 hours into polling day and just over about a fifth of the community have come to vote. Traditionally, tea time is a busy time, so there should be a gallop to the polls, as they say, this part of the country, at about tea time, unless, of course, the long, dark, damp, cold evenings don't keep them at home.
Thanks very much, Cathy. Going to Cork now, our Southern editor Paschal Sheehy is standing by with news from the Cork and Kerry constituencies. Paschal. We're having some difficulty hearing Paschal. We'll go to Athlone. Our Midlands correspondent Kieran Mullooly is standing by. Kieran, we can hear you, I hope.
Something like 25% in some areas. Surprisingly, the turnout has been low in constituencies which have been traditionally associated with strong urban areas, as the people that we would have expected to have voted earlier parts of the day today. I can tell you that Mary McAleese, for instance, lived in County Meath for over 12 years, yet in Meath the turnout has returned at something like 20%, and in one voting area in Navan it was something like 10% just before 5 o'clock. One other factor in the voting today, one issue has become very clear. A great deal of confusion still out there about the referendum, and I can tell you that in many areas the returning officers are saying people are only making one decision on the voting. They haven't voted in the referendum, they return the slip.
So we've been hearing about already. Let's see if that's reflected in the southeast. Our correspondent Damien Tiernan is standing by there. Damien.
Brian, very similar situation here. Turnout in Waterford around 25% at the moment. Again, a lot of confusion over the referendum. Same in Carlow Kilkenny, voting a little bit lower than normal, 22% at the moment. In Wicklow, it's been raining heavily over the last hour, which is adding to the boredom of the presiding officers. Only a quarter of the electorate have so far voted in South Tipperary. One couple who were out very early this morning in Clonmel were Sean and Chris Roach, whose youngest daughter is none other than Aidy Roach. And finally in Wexford, some are blaming the low turnout there, which stands at the moment at around 20%, on due to post-match hangovers.
Now to Dublin, Margaret Ward has been keeping an eye on things there. What's the turnout like so far?
Well, Una, it seems to be reflecting the pattern in the rest of the country. Very slow, best estimates 20 to 25%. The highest turnout seem to be Dublin North Central, Dublin North East. But there are areas such as Dublin South West that have turnouts below 10%. Like party people are saying the turnouts out there are less than half that at a general election at this time. One polling station in Jobestown was only recording 3% by mid-afternoon. Now, the party people and indeed some of the officials are saying that it's hard to see it going over 50% in Dublin. There was 60% in Dublin the last presidential election, so quite a drop. They say there need to be a big rally from tea time on to improve matters, but as you can see, the weather's pretty bad here and hard to see if things will pick up greatly. There's also been problems in Dublin, as you know, on the taxi driver strike, traffic disruption, so people wondering if it will pick up. But it looks like, the same as the rest of the country, quite low.
Thanks, Margaret. Next to the west, where Jim Fahy's been monitoring the trends in Galway and Mayo, where it appears that there are quite a few reluctant voters. Jim.
Yes, well, after the sound and the fury of the campaign tonight here in the West, they're describing it as the quietest election in living memory. There are almost no politicians, campaign workers, or the usual razzmatazz you associate with elections. As far as polling goes, County Galway on average is returning about a 20% poll. In the city it's somewhat less at about 18%. The highest turnout has been at Knock in County Mayo with a 40% poll. But across the county at Delphi, it's been a long, tiring day for the presiding officer there, with only 5 of the 32 people on the register having voted by tea time. And in Ballina, the hometown of former President Mary Robinson, there's also been a lowish turnout of about 15%. But one of the intriguing things of polling day here in the West has been the fact that throughout the day, far more women than men have been turning out to vote. And from Galway, back now to the studio in Dublin.
Thanks very much indeed, Jim. We're going to try to make contact with Cork once again, and Paschal Sheehy. Paschal, I hope we can hear you this time. No, we cannot hear you this time, Paschal. I'm sorry. We're going to have to try and work on this and see if we can get back to you. However, I would be surprised if the story from Cork and Kerry was anything other than what we've been hearing from the rest of the country. We'll have more on that a little later. In the meantime,